Picture this, Baghdad, 9th century. There are no microscopes, no telescopes, no test tubes. Yet this city is humming like a power station for ideas. Inside the legendary House of Wisdom, knowledge isn't a miracle, it's manufactured. Couriers slip in with manuscripts from Byzantium, Persia, and India. Teams of translators, editors, and mathematicians swarm them, pushing pages through a precision workflow where every claim is tested. Every term is defined, and every table is double-checked. What looks like a library is actually more like an engine. Greek astronomy is repurposed for prayer clocks and calendars. Sanskrit numerals become powerful tools for accountants and architects. Legal minds borrow logic from philosophers, while physicians update ancient recipes based on new clinical notes. The result isn't a series of random flashes of genius, it's coordinated breakthroughs. Algebra is codified with rules you can teach. Optics forces light to reveal its secrets. Handbooks are created that let a surveyor in Kufa solve the exact same problem as a builder in Busra. This is the system behind the Golden Age legend. It wasn't just about inspiration, it was about execution. Budgets, schedules, catalogs, copies. This was a city designed to move ideas faster than caravans. If you think civilization was built by lone prodigies, wait until you see the system that turned curiosity into power and changed the world, one page at a time. But how did this world even come to be? Before the Golden Age, the map around Arabia was a patchwork. The Byzantine Empire held Anatolia and the Levant, speaking Greek. The Sasanian Persians controlled Mesopotamia and Iran, with their own complex administration. North Africa was a mix of Berber chieftains and imperial garrisons. Arabia itself was a network of trade oases like Mecca and Yathrib, where poetry was public record, law was based on honor, and merchants learned just enough of other languages to haggle. The Quran standardized the Arabic language, which quickly became the medium for law, diplomacy, and ritual. The community united around a shared creed and disciplined routines of prayer, fasting, and charity. The Prophet Muhammad led not just as a messenger, but as a statesman, forging agreements, issuing judgments, and sending letters to neighboring rulers. This model linked faith with administration, giving caravans rules for contracts and pushing disputes from bloody vendettas to arbitration. After his passing, the Rashidun caliphs rapidly expanded this new order through a combination of military campaigns, negotiation, and treaties. They established tax registers, secured roads, and installed judges who applied a growing body of legal reasoning. Cities like Kufa and Basra, once simple garrisons, grew into bustling markets that attracted craftsmen and scholars. Under the Umayyad dynasty that followed, Damascus became the coordinating hub for a vast empire stretching from Spain to the Indus. River Arabic became the official language of government, and coins were minted with standardized inscriptions. Mosques weren't just for prayer. They were community halls and learning spaces where teachers instructed in scripture, law, and grammar. The architecture itself began to signal authority with grand domes and minarets that also helped mark time with the call to prayer. Knowledge began to flow into this new network. Administrators actively sought out and collected Greek, Persian, and Indian works that had practical value: astronomy for calendars, mathematics for inheritance laws, medicine for hospitals. Early translators in Damascus and Kufa rendered these key texts into Arabic, sometimes through Syriac intermediaries. Astronomical handbooks circulated to improve the timing of prayers, and Indian numerals began to gain traction with accountants looking for a cleaner way to do math. Even before Baghdad became famous, other learning centers were buzzing. In Medina, scholars refined methods for verifying reports about the Prophet. In Mecca's markets, caravans brought not just spices, but stories and ideas from distant lands. Crucially, early Muslim authorities chose to preserve and translate ancient collections rather than erase them. Many Greek philosophical texts survive today only because they passed through this Arabic corridor. And a fun fact that says a lot: the very first muezzin, Bilo ibn Rabah, had been an Ethiopian slave. His prominent public role sent a clear signal that piety and merit could rank higher than lineage. A new, wider identity was taking shape, anchored in language, law, in a sense that learning served both worship and the marketplace. But the Umayyad machine, impressive as it was, began to stall. Governors fought rivals, tax burdens fell unevenly, and non-Arab converts often found themselves paying levies that Arab tribes did not. From the frontiers in Khorasan, local elites watched as officials from distant Damascus came and went, with little care for regional needs. Old Arab tribal feuds resurfaced in the army, and court politics became corrupt. The system was still functioning, but its claim to represent the entire diverse Muslim community was wearing thin. Across the empire, in garrison towns from Marv to Kufa, a mood began to build. Change wasn't just possible, it was necessary. Into this opening stepped the Abbasid family. They claimed descent from Al-Abbas, the Prophet's uncle, and their organizers worked in the shadows of eastern Iran, far from the prying eyes of the court. Their agents moved along caravan routes, building a coalition of disgruntled non-Arab converts, Arab settlers, and Shia sympathizers. Their slogans promised a just rule and a return to rightful leadership. This movement was a masterful blend of devotion, politics, and careful logistics, using safe houses, coded messages, and envoys who could move money and men without attracting attention. When the signal was finally given, their supporters knew exactly where to gather and who to follow. The revolution that followed wasn't just a swap of rulers, it reoriented the entire empire's center of gravity. Damascus, with its strong Arab tribal base, had managed the initial expansion. The Abbasids, however, aimed for a more cosmopolitan empire, one that could integrate Persian administrative expertise, Arab legal traditions, and the ambitions of frontier soldiers. With decisive victories in Persia, they broke the Umayyads' control. The new leader, Abu al-Abbas, sent a clear message. The old order was finished. A new era had begun. This wasn't just a change in leadership. It was the foundation for the world we saw at the beginning, the world of Baghdad and the House of Wisdom. The Abbasids understood that true power wasn't just held by armies, but built by ideas. They created the stability, funding, and intellectual hunger that fueled a century of unprecedented discovery. It's an incredible story of how systems, not just singular geniuses, drive progress. The Golden Age wasn't an accident. It was engineered. Let's travel back to the 8th century, to the birth of a city that would become the intellectual heartbeat of the planet, Baghdad. The Umayyad dynasty had fallen, and a new power, the Abbasids, rose from the east. They came with a powerful promise: equality for all believers, no matter their origin. This message electrified the diverse lands of the former Persian Empire. Skilled administrators, poets, and scholars, long sidelined, now found their talents welcomed. It was a revolution not just of power but of culture. But a new empire needs a new capital. The Abbasid leader, Caliph al-Mansour, New Damascus, the old capital, was haunted by the ghosts of the past. He needed a fresh start, a city that would project power, wealth, and a new kind of order. He chose a strategic bend on the Tigris River, a spot perfectly positioned at the crossroads of the known world. In the year 762, construction began on a city unlike any other. This wasn't a chaotic urban sprawl. This was a statement. Engineers laid out the legendary round city of Baghdad, a perfect circle with concentric walls for massive gates and the Caliph's palace at its very heart. The design was brilliant. It was a fortress, an administrative hub, and a powerful symbol. It sent a clear message. From this center, order radiates out to the entire world. The Tigris River was the city's lifeline. Barges carried timber, stone, and grain, feeding the thousands of laborers and supplying the bustling shipyards. The river connected Baghdad to the Indian Ocean and through overland routes to the Mediterranean. It became a global switchboard for commerce, taxes, and information. And what a crossroads it became. In the sprawling markets, you'd find Greek-speaking clerks, Persian accountants, and Indian mathematicians. Traders haggled over silks from China, indigo from India, and steel from Damascus. In this melting pot, languages and cultures blended. New techniques for papermaking, dyeing, and metalworking traveled with the people who flocked to this vibrant metropolis. At the city's core stood the Grand Palace and the Great Mosque, the twin centers of power and faith. But Baghdad's true legacy was being forged in its libraries and courtyards. The Abbasid rulers weren't just conquerors, they they were patrons of knowledge. They understood that to rule a vast, complex empire, you needed more than soldiers, you needed scholars. They funded translators, mathematicians, grammarians, and astronomers. They sent envoys across the known world to fetch texts from provincial libraries and ancient monasteries. This wasn't just about collecting old books. It was about building something new. Here's a mind-blowing fact. When Baghdad was designed, astronomers were called in to help align its gates with the stars, blending science and symbolism from the very first day. Under Caliph Alman, this quest for knowledge became a state-sponsored project. He established the legendary Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. This wasn't just a library. It was a translation bureau, a research institute, and a university, all rolled into one. It was an intellectual factory. Imagine teams of scholars, fluent in Arabic, Greek, Syriac, Persian, and Sanskrit, working together. One team translates Aristotle's philosophy from Greek. Another tackles Persian administrative manuals. Third, deciphers Indian mathematical texts, introducing concepts like the number 0 to the Arab world. These drafts weren't just copied, they were debated, revised, and improved. Physicians would add notes to medical texts based on their own clinical practice. Astronomers would update ancient charts with new observations made from Baghdad's own observatories. The goal was to gather all the world's knowledge, test it, and make it usably in Arabic, for everyone from engineers to doctors to judges. Once a text was perfected, it was sent to armies of copyists. Thanks to newly established paper mills, books became cheaper and more accessible than ever before. Knowledge that was once locked away in private collections now flowed out to students, officials, and scholars across the empire. In the courtyards and study circles, you could hear a debate on Plato next to a practical discussion on how to survey a field for irrigation. The city ran on paperwork, and its scholars were constantly improving the tools of thought and administration. At night, the glow of oil lamps lit up countless small libraries behind shop fronts, as a new generation of thinkers absorbed, questioned, and built upon this incredible inheritance. This was the golden age of Islam, and Baghdad was its glittering heart. It was a city built not just on brick and mortar, but on the belief that knowledge is power. The work done in the House of Wisdom would preserve ancient knowledge that might have been lost forever, and it would fuel innovations in science, medicine, and mathematics that would shape the course of human history for centuries to come. The legacy of Baghdad is a powerful reminder that the greatest cities are the ones that build bridges, not just across rivers, but across cultures and through time. The goal was audacious. They aimed to create a single, universal language of science. They took Greek theories, Persian statecraft, and Indian mathematics and blended them into a unified technical idiom. This wasn't just about translation, it was about transformation. Astronomical tables were reformatted to fit local calendars. Medical recipes were adapted for local herbs. Complex geometric methods were broken down into clear, practical steps that any skilled artisan could follow. The result was a new handbook culture, knowledge that was precise, reliable, and portable. The atmosphere inside the House of Wisdom was electric. It was a melting pot of faiths and trades. Muslim jurists shared rooms with Christian physicians, Jewish astronomers, and Zoroastrian mathematicians. There was no ceremony, just a relentless focus on a single goal: accuracy. People brought their own unique skills to the table: ancient commentary methods, port medicine routines, and workshop tricks for building instruments. Meetings weren't about dogma. They were about solving problems. How do you translate a Greek term into Arabic without losing its subtle meaning? How do you test a star table against actual observation? How do you standardize weights and measures across a vast, sprawling empire? One of the giants who stood out was Hanan ibn Ishaq. He was a master of medical and philosophical translation. He didn't just translate one text. He would compare multiple Greek manuscripts, create controlled vocabularies in Syriac and Arabic, and produce versions so clear and accurate that physicians could use them directly in their clinics. His students took his methods and expanded them, creating a systematic program for pharmacology and anatomy. Then there was Thabit ibn Qurra, a titan of mathematics and astronomy. He wasn't content to just copy old proofs. He reworked them, clarified number theory, and designed new and better instruments for observing the heavens. Their output was staggering: and it moved fast. Why? Because the institution was a well-oiled machine, kept editors, technicians, and patrons all working in perfect alignment. This incredible push for translation was a hinge point in civilization. Manuscripts that might have been lost forever, scattered in dusty, forgotten archives, were suddenly brought into wide circulation in a durable, accessible form. Commentaries stabilized knowledge, pinpointing problem areas and flagging gaps for new research. And when different texts conflicted, the teams in Baghdad didn't just pick one and discard the rest. They compared, they tested, and they issued corrected compilations that practitioners could actually trust. A quiet revolution was also happening thanks to a new material, paper. Introduced from China and manufactured in local mills, paper fundamentally changed the scale of knowledge. It was cheap, it took ink beautifully, and it allowed for marginal notes and diagrams in a way that expensive parchment never could. Postal routes became information highways, moving copies of texts to schools, hospitals, and courts across the empire. Count registers, star charts, and medical formularies multiplied, and with them, a shared technical vocabulary began to spread. Baghdad's libraries operated like early universities. Teachers would dictate, students would produce notebooks, and formal debates would train memory and logic. Rooms hosted scheduled sessions on logic, physics, ethics, and metaphysics, with fees recorded and timetables posted. The scholars of this era didn't just think, they measured. Teams from this milieu calculated the circumference of the Earth, using nothing more than shadow angles and baseline surveys. And their result was accurate to within a few hundred kilometers. Numbers became a shared tongue, understood in royal courts, desert caravans, and bustling workshops. In the early 9th century, scholars started treating arithmetic and geometry not as abstract disciplines, but as practical tools that could serve both the heavens and the shop floor. Calendar makers, tax clerks, architects, and astronomers all began using common procedures. The genius of the House of Wisdom was turning those procedures into teachable steps. Vague rules of thumb were replaced by tables, proofs, and worked examples, so a student in Basra could solve the same problem as a surveyor in Kufa. At the center of this mathematical universe was a man named Muhammad ibn Musa Al-Khwarizmi. He was a mathematician whose texts offered a clean, elegant way to handle quantity. He wrote handbooks that stated a problem, laid out the exact operations, and gave clear numerical examples. His book on completion and balancing asterisk, Algebra, Al-Muqabala asterisk, defined the operations for solving 4 unknown variables, bringing order to linear and quadratic equations. His work was incredibly practical. He used it to solve inheritance disputes, settle business partnerships, and calculate land division, even for irregular plots with curved boundaries. Builders used his layouts to compute the areas for courtyards and domes, keeping costs and materials aligned. His name, Al-Khwarizmi, later gave us the word algorithm, because his entire approach was focused on step-by-step rules that always lead to a result. Start here, apply this step, then this one, and you will arrive at a correct answer. This algorithmic mindset spread like wildfire across disciplines. Astronomers used sequences of steps to reduce observational data. Accountants tallied revenues with positional notation. Jurists checked legal shares using standardized operations. The method mattered just as much as the solution because it could be taught, repeated, and audited for accuracy. One of the most significant shifts came with the adoption of Hindu-Arabic numerals. The symbols 0 through 9 written on paper were a game changer. A single column could now carry place value for tens, hundreds, thousands, and beyond. Compared to older systems like Roman numerals, which relied on repeated marks, the new notation made complex multiplication and division practical to do right on the page. Schools taught algorithms for carrying and borrowing. Market stalls kept detailed ledgers. State treasuries could reconcile regional accounts faster and with far fewer errors. And at the heart of this system was the zero. The asterisk, SIFR, asterisk. It held a place when nothing was there, allowing digits to shift in rank without creating confusion. This idea of an absence having a function felt strange to many, but its power was undeniable. Astronomers could handle their fractions more cleanly. Geometers could align their proofs with greater precision. Even with some initial resistance, The practice spread because it saved time and exposed mistakes quickly. Geometry literally left the page and entered the world of stone and wood. Mosque plans were built upon intricate patterns of circles, squares, and star polygons, laid out with a simple compass and chord. Craftsmen used proportional grids to scale arches and domes, ensuring that the immense forces of thrust were perfectly balanced. Pattern makers developed repeating tile units that could cover walls and floors without gaps, using rules tied to symmetry and angle. Mathematics wasn't just for decoration. It guided the cuts and made complex, beautiful forms buildable on a massive scale. Trigonometry also took a giant leap forward as observers refined the links between angles and lengths. Sine tables became more accurate, and new procedures for tangent and cotangent entered the handbooks. Scholars like Al-Battani adjusted the values for the solar year and the timing of eclipses. This had immediate practical applications, improving the accuracy of prayer schedules and, crucially, navigation across open deserts and seas. Mariners learned to calculate their latitude and direction with numerical aids, while instrument makers etched precise scales onto astrolabes that matched these new computed functions. Medicine, too, was transformed. It shifted from being a simple list of remedies to a systematic science with rules, records, and tests. Physicians wrote detailed case notes, compared patient outcomes, and corrected recipes when treatments failed. A strong code of ethics guided their practice, requiring consent before procedures, demanding accountability for mistakes, and developing triage systems to prioritize the most urgent cases. Doctors learned to link symptoms to natural causes, moving away from a reliance on charms. Anatomy lessons, often from animal dissections, informed surgery. Pharmacology was based on measured doses and standardized preparations. The goal, again, was repeatability, developing methods that any trained practitioner could apply in the same way, with success judged by the patient's recovery. Great cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo built hospitals or by Maristans, asterisks that made this entire system run, combining treatment, research, and medical education under one roof. The legacy of the House of Wisdom and this incredible era is all around us. It's in the algorithms that run our computers, the algebra we learn in school, and the scientific method that underpins our modern world. It was a time when curiosity was currency, and the quest for knowledge united people from all walks of life. It reminds us that progress is a collaborative journey, built on the foundations laid by those who came before. Ever wonder what hospitals were like 1,000 years ago? Forget the grim, chaotic scenes you might imagine. Picture this: a bustling center of healing, staffed day and night by rotating teams. When you arrived, intake clerks wouldn't just take your name. They'd register you and direct you to a specialized ward. Got an eye problem? There's a ward for that. A broken bone? Head to the surgical unit? This wasn't a pay-to-enter clinic. This was a public service, a true hospital. Inside, pharmacies weren't just handing out herbs. They were compounding medicines based on written formularies, issuing labeled doses just like today. And get this, teaching rooms were attached to the wards. Students could follow doctors on their rounds, hear diagnoses firsthand, and learn by observing real cases under supervision. When it was time to go home, discharge protocols often included follow-up visits and even food stipends for the poor to ensure a full recovery. This system turned healthcare from a private transaction into a public good. One of the masterminds behind this revolution was a physician named Al-Khwarizmi. He was a prolific writer who documented cases for decades. He didn't just treat patients, he studied them. He would compare different therapies for the same condition to see what actually worked best. In his massive medical encyclopedia, he compiled observations, debates, and practical notes that other doctors could consult right at the bedside. His most famous contribution? He was the first to clearly distinguish smallpox from measles. He detailed the clinical signs, the timing of the fever, the pattern of the rash, and the course of the illness. This meant treatments could finally be targeted and effective, not just generic. Al-Khwarizmi was also incredibly honest for his time. He advised against using untested remedies and meticulously tracked side effects, a practice we now call clinical trials. His leadership in the Baghdad hospital created a model for administrative organization, staff duties, and record-keeping that was copied by cities far and wide. Another giant was Ali ibn al-Abbas al-Majusi. He wrote a book called The Complete Book of the Medical Art. Think of it as the ultimate medical textbook of its day. It was beautifully structured, starting with anatomy and physiology, then moving logically through diagnosis, pharmacology, and surgery. Its clear chapters, defined terms, and step-by-step procedures trained generations of physicians. The book was so methodical that it was translated and used for centuries across different cultures and languages. Where earlier texts mixed theory with stories, this handbook separated them. This allowed future doctors to easily update sections as new evidence emerged, a crucial step in the progress of science. But it wasn't all about drugs and scalpels. These ancient hospitals understood something profound: the connection between mind, body, and environment. Cleanliness was paramount. They mandated regular bathing for patients, frequent changes of bed linens, and good airflow to prevent infection and odors. How the very design of the hospitals was meant to heal. Quiet courtyards with gentle fountains were built to calm patients. Attendants would read calming prose to those who were restless. Physicians didn't just check your pulse. They recorded your sleep, diet, and mood. They knew that stress could slow down healing, and they adjusted treatments accordingly. Some wards even used music therapy to reduce anxiety. They noted that patients had better appetites and steadier heart rates after listening to calming melodies. These details weren't just nice touches. They made medical care more humane and far more effective. It was a holistic approach that modern medicine is only now beginning to fully appreciate. This incredible medical system was a melting pot of knowledge. It blended Greek physiological theories, Persian clinical practices, and Indian knowledge of medicinal plants. But these scholars weren't just copying old books. They were scientists, testing inherited theories against real-world results at the patient's bedside. They adjusted dosages based on locally available herbs and minerals. Step into one of their pharmacies, and you'd smell musk, camphor, and myrrh. You'd see mortars and pestles grinding leaves and resins into syrups, pills and ointments, with scales measuring every ingredient to precise tolerances. In anatomy rooms, they've studied animal organs to make surgery safer, mapping out the paths of vessels and nerves. This was a world where tradition met rigorous hands-on experimentation. This explosion of knowledge wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was part of a much larger intellectual project that was transforming society. As scholars translated ancient Greek texts, they faced a huge question. How do you align reason and logic with faith and revelation? This wasn't just an abstract debate. Courts needed reliable standards for evidence. Doctors needed to make accurate prognoses. Astronomers needed to test their models of the universe. Solution was a grand shared project: to use reason to clarify knowledge and organize it into disciplines that could be taught, tested, and improved upon. A philosopher known as Al-Khwarizmi was a key pioneer. He saw Greek philosophy not as a rival to his own culture, but as a powerful set of tools. He wrote about causes, definitions, and the nature of the intellect, always asking how these ideas could make legal discussions and medical diagnoses more precise. He insisted on using exact terminology so that when a judge or a doctor made a claim, the words had a stable, understood meaning. He guided translators to preserve the logical structure of arguments, not just the vocabulary. This made ancient Greek logic usable in the courtrooms and clinics of Baghdad. But these new ideas also raised new questions. If nature follows knowable laws, where does that leave room for miracles? If ethics can be based on reason, what is the role of divine instruction? These were the big questions of the day, and they had real-world implications. A philosopher named Al-Khwarizmi, known as the second teacher after Aristotle, took on this challenge. He created an entire curriculum of knowledge, mapping out the sciences in a logical order. He described a virtuous city as one where knowledge guides leaders and education builds character. He even applied the same structured, logical methods to write about music theory. His system showed students how each field of study fit together, what counted as proof within it, and how they all supported one another. These intense debates weren't hidden away in ivory towers. They happened in study circles, government offices, and even hospital classrooms. Philosophers, theologians, and doctors would gather for spirited but structured exchanges. The rules were simple: define your terms, state your premises, show your chain of reasoning, and accept correction if your logic fails. A physician might defend a claim with observation, while a theologian would press them on the limits of their reasoning. The common language they all shared was logic. Of course, there was tension. Some worried that philosophy could overreach and cloud the clarity of Scripture. Others argued that without logic and demonstration, Science would be stuck, relying only on authority and old habits. But this very friction was productive. It trained a generation of thinkers to be sharp, critical, and methodical. Under the soft glow of oil lamps, students traced syllogisms, compared different translations of Aristotle, and connected scientific principles with ethical maxims. This incredible synthesis of faith and reason can be seen in how they viewed the heavens. The night sky served two needs at once. It was a source of devotion, setting prayer times and marking lunar months. But it was also an object of scientific inquiry, a vast space to be measured and understood. For these scholars, observing the stars was a form of worship through method. You align your instrument, take a reading, compare it to a table, and revise your calculations if a star has drifted from its predicted path. This scientific habit transformed mosques, courts, and workshops into centers of research, where the same rigorous calculations supported both ritual and science. This legacy of curiosity, rigor, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge laid the foundations for so much of the world we live in today. Imagine a world where the quest for knowledge wasn't just a pursuit, but the very heartbeat of a civilization. A world where science, art, and poetry weren't separate fields, but threads woven into a single, magnificent tapestry. This was the golden age of Islamic civilization, a period of breathtaking innovation that illuminated the world. Let's travel back and witness how they mapped the heavens, mastered the word, and designed a world of unparalleled beauty. Our journey begins under a canopy of stars, in bustling centers of learning from Baghdad to Samarkand. Here, astronomy was a precise and monumental craft. Picture this: assistants meticulously leveling water clocks to track the passage of time, their movements silent and steady. On polished floors, they marked meridian lines with plumb bobs, creating a fixed reference so measurements could be repeated. Night after night, with unwavering accuracy. In cities like Samarkand, the scale of this ambition became truly awe-inspiring. They didn't just build observatories. They built colossal instruments into the very architecture. Massive quadrants, crafted from masonry, were fixed in place and calibrated against the sun's highest point at noon. These weren't just tools. They were monuments to precision. And then there was the astrolabe. This device, a beautiful brass disc, was the smartphone of its day. It was a compressed model of the sky, with latitude plates that could be swapped out for different locations. With a star and a simple rule, an astronomer could solve complex problems in minutes. It was portable, powerful, and it put the cosmos in the palm of your hand. But instruments are only as good as the data they use. The astronomical tables of Ptolemy, an ancient Greek scholar, became a common reference. Scholars like Al-Battani didn't just accept this ancient wisdom, they refined it. He recalculated the length of the solar year with incredible precision and tracked the equation of time, the slight daily difference between clock time and sun time. Why did this matter so much? Because even tiny errors in the sun's perceived motion add up quickly. Al-Battani's numbers kept calendars accurate and predictions for eclipses reliable, preventing the slow drift that had plagued older systems. His work taught a generation of astronomers how to turn raw observations into practical parameters, a foundational step for modern science. This precision wasn't just for scholars. It benefited mariners navigating vast oceans and timekeepers in every city. Cataloging the sky became a craft in its own right. The astronomer Al-Sufi took on the immense task of compiling a definitive star atlas. He updated the brightness, names, and positions of countless stars. And in his meticulous work, he described a faint cloud in the constellation Andromeda. We now recognize this as the first known written record of the Andromeda galaxy, our closest galactic neighbor. Al-Sufi also ingeniously reconciled traditional Arabic star lore with the Greek constellations, creating a universal guide that allowed scholars to move between different traditions without losing precision. The diagrams in his manuscripts were copied so carefully that the orientation of the stars remained consistent across generations, a testament to their dedication to clarity. But these scholars weren't just content with observing. They were driven to refine. For centuries, the Ptolemaic model, which placed the Earth at the center of the universe, was the standard. Astronomers in the Islamic world spent countless nights comparing the Model S predictions with what they actually saw in the sky. When there was a mismatch, They didn't just shrug. They adjusted the parameters, proposed alternative circular motions, or even introduced new geometric devices to explain the irregular movements of the planets. They published revised handbooks, not as dusty academic texts, but as practical guides with clear instructions for computing a planet's position. Over time, these constant corrections produced far more accurate tables of planetary motion, known as ephemerides. More importantly, this process fostered a culture that prioritized testable, observable results over blind deference to ancient authorities. It was a revolutionary shift in thinking. This practical edge was everywhere, determining the Qibla, direction of prayer towards Mecca, from any city in the world, required sophisticated spherical geometry. Mathematicians developed precise procedures using known latitudes and longitudes to compute the exact direction. Across the empire, from Marrakesh to the Far East, mosques used intricate sundials and astrolabes to post the daily prayer times, anchoring the rhythm of life to the rhythm of the cosmos. Out on the open sea, navigators lifted astrolabes to the horizon, measuring a star's height to estimate their latitude. They kept their course steady using bearings learned from experienced coastal pilots, aided by portable quadrants and simple navigational tools. At the same time, the world itself was being mapped. Travelers, merchants, and officials collected a wealth of information, distances between cities, courses of rivers, and lists of goods from bustling markets. Geographers organized this flood of data into comprehensive regional surveys. One of the most remarkable achievements came from Al-Khwarizmi, who worked for the Sicilian court in the 12th century. He compiled one of the most detailed world maps of the era, combining information from merchant routes, coastal soundings from sailors, and older coordinates into a single, coherent planisphere. But it was more than just a map. It was accompanied by extensive text describing the climates, peoples, and goods of each region, making it an invaluable tool for both trade and governance. Now let's step out of the observatory and into the vibrant world of arts and letters, where words held as much power as numbers. In the Golden Age, art and language were the shared identity of a culture. Poetry wasn't a private hobby, it was a public good. A single, powerful line of verse could settle a legal dispute, celebrate a ruler, or instill a moral lesson in the hearts of thousands. The written word carried status, but the spoken word carried reach. As schools and libraries multiplied, literacy flourished. The Arabic language became the primary vehicle for intellect and scholarship. Grammar schools produced readers who could understand the finest distinctions in law and theology. This demand for precision shaped a clear, elegant prose style. At the same time, the Persian language blossomed as the language of poetry, romance, and courtly life. Its beautiful meters and rich imagery were perfectly suited for epic stories of love, fate, and kingship. Arabic steered technical thought, while Persian shaped emotional and narrative depth. They were two languages, sharing the same road. Within this landscape, literary giants emerged. Al-Mutanabbi forged verses that were confident, witty, and full of sharp observations of the world around him. His poems traveled like wildfire because they were memorable. The performer could recite them in a crowded hall, and the audience would remember the lines after hearing them just once. Then there was Rudaki, often called the father of Persian poetry. He established the templates for courtly poems and personal reflections that would influence poets for centuries to come. Both of these masters benefited from an audience trained to appreciate the subtleties of meter, meaning, and moral weight, all without needing a script. Visual art, too, followed a sophisticated system where restraint became a source of incredible beauty. Calligraphy, the art of beautiful handwriting, transformed scripture and scholarship into visual masterpieces. Scribes practiced for years to achieve a perfect balance of speed, harmony, and legibility. Geometric design exploded in popularity, adorning tiles, woodwork, and textiles. Using only compasses and straight edges, craftsmen created intricate, creating patterns and interlacing bands that filled walls and pages with a sense of infinite order and harmony, all without using figurative images. Finally, prose culture expanded through a genre known as asterisk adab, asterisk a blend of ethics, history, and practical wisdom. Collections like the famous fables of asterisk Kalila wa Dimna, Asterisk offered layered stories where animal characters debated politics and prudence, teaching human readers valuable lessons about life. Storytelling was a bridge connecting generations. Ancient pre-Islamic odes continued to be performed, while new compilations gathered legends, travel tales, and courtroom dramas into vast cycles. These collections would eventually feed into the stream of stories we now know as the 1001 Nights *. From the grand observatories charting distant galaxies to the intimate recitation of a poem, the Islamic Golden Age was fueled by an insatiable curiosity and a profound belief in the power of knowledge. It was a time that reminds us that science and art are not opposing forces, but two sides of the same coin, humanity's enduring quest to understand and beautify the world. Imagine a world shattered, a prince on the run. This is the story of Abd al-Rahman I, an Umayyad prince who escaped the bloody rise of the Abbasids. He crossed the vast expanse of North Africa, a fugitive with a royal lineage, and landed in Iberia, a land teeming with rival Arab and Berber factions. From this chaos he forged a new destiny. In Cordoba he built his power base, not just with swords but with wisdom. He secured loyalty by granting land, forming strategic marriages, and creating a personal guard from Berber allies and local converts to Islam. He stabilized tax collection, reformed the army, and in a bold move, declared an emirate that answered to no one in the East. From this single act of defiance, a Western Golden Age began to blossom, marching to its own unique rhythm. Cordoba transformed. It wasn't just a capital, it was a statement. The city announced its status through incredible infrastructure. Roads were paved, sturdy bridges kept trade flowing even through harsh winters, and sophisticated waterworks fed public baths and lush gardens. Imagine this. Long after sunset, the streets of Cordoba were illuminated by lamps, a sight unheard of in most of the world. Patrols kept order, allowing shops to stay open late into the night, buzzing with life. Near the grand mosques and palaces, book markets multiplied. Paper, once a luxury, was produced in local mills, making it affordable for students and clerks. This explosion of knowledge created a vibrant social fabric. Physicians, jurists, and artisans formed guild-like circles. Training apprentices and upholding high standards of their crafts, this society thrived on fusion, not forced uniformity. It was a brilliant tapestry woven from different cultures. Arab administrators collaborated with Berber commanders who knew the rugged frontier like the back of their hands. Jewish physicians and scholars were esteemed members of the court, while Christian scribes managed records in both Latin and Arabic. This spirit of cooperation was even written into the law. Contracts allowed people to choose judges from their own communities, ensuring that legal outcomes were respected across all neighborhoods. This blend was everywhere. The music mixed Eastern melodies with local Iberian rhythms, and the cuisine combined North African spices with the fresh produce of Spain. Nowhere was this synthesis more beautifully realized than in Cordoba's Great Mosque. It's a forest of columns and iconic double-tiered arches, a design that was both structurally ingenious and breathtakingly beautiful. It lifted the roof high without heavy oppressive walls, allowing light to dance and move freely across the vast prayer hall. As later rulers expanded the mosque, they did so with mathematical precision, keeping the rhythm and proportions consistent, creating a space that felt both immense and harmonious. But it was more than just a place of prayer. It was the city's intellectual heart, hosting law lectures and poetry readings. Here, theology, verse, and politics all shared the same air. Under Abd al-Rahman III, Cordoba's confidence soared. He took the title of Caliph, declaring complete independence and projecting power across the Mediterranean. He built magnificent reception halls, managed complex diplomacy, and generously funded scholars writing in both Arabic and Hebrew. His successor, Al-Hakam II, was a true bibliophile who deepened the city's love for books. He organized massive cataloging projects, sent buyers to the far corners of the Islamic world for rare manuscripts, and paid skilled copyists to reproduce complex scientific diagrams with perfect accuracy. The city's libraries swelled with works on medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. This incredible environment produced intellectual giants whose names bridged worlds. Averroes or Ibn Rushd wrote brilliant commentaries that clarified the complex works of Aristotle. providing a precise vocabulary that European scholars would later translate into Latin. But he wasn't just a philosopher, he was a practicing physician and judge, moving seamlessly between abstract theory and real-world application. Then there was Maimonides, who trained in this Andalusi setting, wrote medical treatises and legal codes that became essential texts for Jewish communities across the diaspora. The methods forged in Cordoba's intellectual circles were spreading. In cities like Toledo, teams of translators worked in a streamlined process, rendering the vast knowledge of Arabic science and philosophy into Latin, sparking a revolution in European thought. Imagine those evenings in Cordoba. Courtyards filled with the scent of orange blossoms hosted lively debates. Fountains cooled the air in marble halls. In garden pavilions, melodies rose as students recited poetry, their teachers gently correcting their meter. It was into this world of intense intellectual curiosity that a man from Busra, Ibn al-Haytham, brought a revolutionary idea. His goal was simple and profound: to test ancient claims about light with experiments that anyone could repeat. Trained in mathematics and astronomy, he turned his attention to vision because the old Greek theories just didn't add up. They argued that our eyes sent out invisible rays to touch objects. Ibn al-Haytham asked a simpler, testable question: does vision start at the eye or at the source of light? His answer flipped optics on its head. He argued that light travels from luminous objects like the sun and reflects off other surfaces, entering the eye. The eye was a receiver, not a transmitter. To prove it, he used elegant, simple observations. He analyzed how bright light can overwhelm our vision and why looking at the sun is blinding. He meticulously studied shadows, showing how their edges behaved exactly as you would expect if light traveled in straight lines. His masterpiece, the Book of Optics, organized this proof with geometric rigor. He treated reflection from mirrors and refraction through glass not as mere curiosities, but as measurable events. Angle in, angle out. Change the medium, change the path. He didn't stop there. He described how perception itself depends on the geometry of rays entering the pupil and on the brain's incredible ability to combine these signals into a coherent image. He carefully separated the physical reality of light from our psychological interpretation of it, creating a framework for centuries of future research. Mathematics was his anchor. He modeled light rays as straight lines and used geometry to predict exactly where an image would appear. Physics supplied the causes, explaining how different materials bend or slow light down. Then came the crucial step: testing his predictions with controlled experiments. He would observe, hypothesize, deduce, and test, revising his ideas in a loop until they held up under every condition. His cleanest demonstration was the camera obscura. He darkened a room, cut a tiny hole in a shutter, and watched as a beam of light projected a perfect inverted image of the outside world onto the opposite wall. He noted that the image became sharper as the opening shrank, behavior that perfectly followed his theory of light traveling in straight lines. This simple device proved that the eye didn't need to send anything out to see a complex scene. Centuries later, this exact principle would become the foundation for the invention of the camera. Ibn al-Haytham's influence was immense. Latin readers knew him as Alhazen, and his work was studied intensely across Europe. Thinkers like Roger Bacon built upon his experimental methods. Johannes Kepler used his reasoning to correctly place the formation of an image on the retina. And Isaac Newton began his own legendary explorations of light, armed with a tradition that already treated mathematics and experimentation as inseparable partners. The story of Ibn al-Haytham, born from the Golden Age of Cordoba, is a powerful reminder that one clear question, rigorously tested, can change the way we see the entire world. Intro music begins, thoughtful and slightly mysterious, with a hint of Middle Eastern melody. Imagine a man who feigned madness to escape a dangerous political assignment, only to spend his confinement producing groundbreaking scientific manuscripts. That man was Ibn Sina, known to the Latin West as Avicenna. Growing up in the vibrant intellectual hubs of Bukhara and Khwarizm, he was a true prodigy. With access to incredible private libraries and a network of traveling teachers, the young Ibn Sina devoured knowledge. By the time he was 18, he wasn't just reading about medicine, logic, and astronomy. He saw them as an interconnected toolkit for understanding the world. His early career saw him treating nobles, which granted him access to even more extensive collections, pushing his learning far beyond what any single master could teach. This forged a lifelong habit that would change the world: absorb, test, refine, and write. His most monumental achievement, a work that echoed through the halls of medicine for centuries, was the Canon of Medicine. This wasn't just another book. It was a revolution in medical thinking. It systematically organized illnesses, their symptoms, and various treatments with a clarity that was unheard of. A physician could use it right at a patient's bedside. The canon standardized pharmacology, offering careful notes on dosages and the complex interactions of compound drugs. Its influence was immense, stretching from the hospitals of Cairo to the universities of Paris. It wasn't popular because of beautiful prose, but because its logical structure made medicine teachable, repeatable, and scalable. For generations, pharmacists copied its formulas. Lecturers taught from its outlines, and commentators debated it line by line, keeping its framework alive even as specific medical details evolved over time. But Avicenna's ambition didn't stop with the human body. He set out to map the entirety of reality with the same rigorous order he brought to physiology. Drawing on the works of Aristotle and later commentators, he constructed a comprehensive philosophical system that connected logic, physics, psychology, and metaphysics. At the very heart of this system was a profound distinction that altered the course of philosophy. He argued that understanding what a thing is its essence, doesn't explain that it is its existence. That gap, he proposed, required a necessary existence, a prime source that grants existence to all other contingent things. This single idea was so powerful it shaped theological and philosophical debates across cultures for centuries, finding its way into the works of later Muslim theologians and, through translation, into the great schools of medieval Christian thought. He approached the soul with the same analytical precision. For Avicenna, the soul wasn't some vague poetic metaphor. It was a subject for rigorous scientific analysis. In his psychology, he detailed a graded path from raw sensation to pure understanding, moving through perception, imagination, and intellect. He argued that human reason, when disciplined by logic and purified of error, could ascend toward truths that lie beyond the material world. He didn't see reason and faith as enemies. Instead, he presented rational inquiry as a path that aligns with spiritual growth, giving scholars a clear method to tackle the same profound questions that mystics and theologians explored through faith and devotion. The sheer breadth of his work is staggering. He produced hundreds of works spanning medicine, logic, metaphysics, ethics, astronomy, and even music theory. Some were massive encyclopedic syntheses, while others were concise handbooks that circulated widely among study circles. And in all of them, a consistent pattern emerges. Define your terms, state your principles, test the consequences, and correct any confusion. Reading his work feels like watching an engineer draw a perfect blueprint for the intellect. His medical encyclopedia, for example, did more than just classify diseases. It discussed the concept of contagion, recommended isolating the sick during outbreaks, and insisted on testing new remedies with controlled observation before they were put into general use. In an era long before microscopes, he treated evidence as the ultimate judge and warned against accepting authority without demonstration. This habit of disciplined skepticism is precisely why students copied his texts for generation after generation. If you could picture him in a single scene, it would be this: a scholar at a low table. Scrolls unfurled, ink flowing onto a neat page. An astrolabe sits nearby, celestial diagrams sketched in the margins. The specific tools might change as he shifts from medicine to metaphysics, but his posture of intense focus does not. He learned through repetition so intense that rereading a single work dozens of times was part of his routine. That incredible stamina fueled his vast range, and his range, in turn, fed an empire of readers who would build their own intellectual systems upon the magnificent scaffolding he left behind. While Avicenna was building his intellectual empire, the political world around him was fracturing. Power was slowly drifting away from the Abbasid capital of Baghdad. Provincial governors began keeping tax revenues to pay their own troops. Military commanders, often drawn from Turkish and Dalamite ranks, answered first to their paymasters, not too distant orders from the Caliph. As the empire's supply lines stretched thin from Central Asia to North Africa, local strongmen learned that controlling fortresses, markets, and canals was more important than formal recognition from a weakened caliph. Coins might still bear the Abbasid names, but the hands that minted them belonged to newly independent regional courts. Across the map, new dynasties emerged. In North Africa, the Fatimids established a rival caliphate, building a powerful state that expanded eastward. In the Iranian plateau in Iraq, the Buyids, a dynasty of Dalamite military leaders, marched into Baghdad itself. They guided policy and controlled the state, but kept the Abbasid Caliph on the throne as a symbol of continuity. And far to the west, the Umayyads in Cordoba elevated their own status, asserting complete sovereignty over a flourishing Iberian realm. Each of these new courts established its own administration, its own judges, and its own network of clients, projecting power through law and culture as much as through the sword. But this fragmentation didn't stifle learning, it multiplied it. Instead of one central hub, the intellectual map lit up with many brilliant beacons. Cairo became a major center for theology, law, and astronomy, its influence growing with massive endowments. Cities like Bukhara and Nishapur sponsored scholars who wrote in both Arabic and Persian, their court libraries circulating knowledge through embassies and merchant caravans. Cordoba, in Spain, supported a dazzling array of physicians, philosophers, and grammarians whose work crossed linguistic and cultural borders through a flurry of translation and copying. Even within Baghdad, though the caliph's direct authority had narrowed, the city remained a hub of activity. Viziers managed revenue, and military commanders negotiated salaries and garrison placements. The caliph's court still received delegations and issued robes of honor, but the daily machinery of the state was run by bureaucrats and officers balancing the interests of rival factions. Patronage continued, but now the initiative often came from powerful ministers who sought to enhance their own prestige by supporting scholars and engineers. The Fatimids, for their part, reshaped Egypt entirely. They built a new capital, Al-Qahira Cairo, and endowed a center of learning that would outlast their dynasty, Al-Azhar. It became a place where lectures, legal opinions, and debates accumulated over generations. Its model of using revenue from endowed properties to permanently finance teaching protected scholarship from the chaos of court politics. This stable funding allowed curricula to expand and specialize. Rival courts quickly saw the value in this model and invested heavily in culture as a form of diplomacy. Poets composed odes that immortalized military victories. Astronomers compiled tables essential for calendars and navigation. Physicians staffed state-of-the-art hospitals whose methods impressed foreign dignitaries. A scholarly treatise dedicated to a ruler was both a practical handbook and a powerful political statement. The arts and sciences had become the ultimate measure of a dynasty's legitimacy and power. Outro music begins to swell. From the singular mind of a genius like Sina to the sprawling competitive landscape of successor states, this era shows us that knowledge is a form of power. It can be built by one or nurtured by many. When borders moved, everything changed. Alliances that once stood firm suddenly crumbled, and the great trade routes, the arteries of empires, twisted to mirror these new rivalries. Caravans laden with silks and spices were forced to steer towards friendly ports and safer mountain passes. This wasn't just about avoiding danger. It was about survival, redirecting the flow of taxes and tolls that could make or break a kingdom. In this shifting world, alliances formed and fell apart along lines of faith and local interest. Sunni and Shia patrons found themselves on diverging paths, even as their scholars pored over the very same books. Yet despite the divisions, a vibrant network of exchange thrived. Ships crisscrossed the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, linking the grand courts of the Islamic heartlands to distant Sicily, East Africa, and Gujarat. This constant flow blended materials, instruments, and techniques, sparking innovation in workshops and observatories from one end of the known world to the other. This era was a paradox, a whirlwind of instability that somehow fueled incredible invention. Multiple calendars, different schools of law, and competing philosophical programs all grew up side by side. Sometimes they clashed, but more often, they cross-pollinated, enriching one another. Copyists, the unsung heroes of this age, carried precious manuscripts between cities. Physicians in Baghdad would compare hospital protocols with their counterparts in Cairo. Mathematicians, separated by hundreds of miles, would challenge each other with complex problems sent by letter. Picture this. At one moment in the 10th century, 3 different caliphs ruled from Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo, each claiming to be the supreme leader of the faithful. Yet a merchant could pick up a new scholarly commentary in one of these rival realms, ferry it to another, and find an eager buyer all within the same week. Even when armies were on the march, the traffic of ideas always outran them. A scholar in Nishaper in eastern Persia might casually cite a work that had been copied in Toledo, Spain, having traveled all the way through North Africa and Egypt to reach him. Then they arrived, thundering out of the vast Central Asian steppes, speaking a Turkic tongue and carrying the formidable habits of mounted warfare. These were the Seljuk Turks. They had embraced Islam through contact with scholars and traders along the Oxus River and moved west not as a great horde, but as small, scattered clans who learned to act as a single, devastating force. Their leaders cleverly framed themselves as protectors of Sunni tradition at a time when rival courts were all competing for religious authority. What began as a role of frontier fighters, paid mercenaries for larger empires, soon transformed into a destiny of rule. Their cavalry was their greatest weapon, capable of covering vast distances with astonishing speed. They could pressure cities into negotiation before a siege had even properly begun. Under their leader, Tughril Beg, they seized the vital trade routes and towns along the Great Khorasan Road in Persia, then advanced relentlessly towards Iraq. In a masterstroke of political theater, Tughril entered Baghdad not as a conqueror, but as an ally, the strong man who could finally secure the capital and its bustling markets. His successor, the legendary Alp-Arslan, pushed even farther, consolidating Seljuk control over Persia and striking deep into Byzantine Anatolia. They anchored their gains with military garrisons, but their true genius lay in the deals they offered to local elites. Keep your lands, deliver your taxes, and provide troops for our campaigns. With each new victory, they replaced fragmented, petty authorities with a clear chain of command that stretched from the smallest caravan post all the way to the Caliph escort in Baghdad. They cleverly propped up the Abbasid Caliph, raising his status as the spiritual leader, while keeping the real levers of power firmly in their own hands. The Caliph granted them titles, blessed their campaigns, and served as the religious figurehead. But it was the Seljuk sultans who commanded the armies, appointed the governors, and managed the immense revenues of the state. This created a practical and stable division of power. The moral center of the Islamic world remained in Baghdad, with the Caliph. But the administrative and military weight shifted to the Seljuk chancellories. Their administration was a brilliant fusion of Persian bureaucratic methods and Turkic military discipline. Persian scribes kept the meticulous registers, drafted the edicts, and managed the complex land tax assessments. They developed a system of military grants called ikta, which supported their powerful cavalry without draining the central treasury. Instead of paying soldiers cash, they were given the rights to tax a piece of land, turning tax collection into a budget for men and horses. A network of couriers carried sealed orders between provincial capitals, and regular audits kept a check on governors who might be tempted to treat public revenue as their private piggy bank. The result was a system that could pay its armies on time, keep the roads policed, and stabilize prices in the major city markets. Then came the moment that changed the map forever. In 1071, at the Battle of Manzikert, Alp-Arslan's forces met a massive Byzantine army and, against all odds, completely shattered it, even capturing the Byzantine emperor on the field. This stunning victory threw open the highland routes and fertile valleys of Anatolia to Turkish settlement. New towns and frontier emirates sprang up, permanently changing the region's people and economy. From there, trade and migration continued to push west, and new local powers formed under the overarching authority of the Seljuks. The intellectual backbone of this powerful state was a man named Nizam al-Mulk, their famed vizier. He founded a network of influential colleges, the Nimimiyas, in cities from Nishapur to Baghdad. He endowed them with salaries for professors of law, theology, and grammar, and even provided students with stipends and dormitories. These schools standardized curricula and created a reliable pipeline of trained judges, administrators, and preachers for the growing empire. His Book of Government became a practical manual for rulers, one of the earliest political handbooks in any language. Seljuk patronage reshaped city skylines and travel networks. Grand mosques rose with magnificent brick domes and intricately carved stucco. Caravanserais fortified roadside inns dotted the trade routes at one-day ride intervals, giving merchants secure lodging, stables, and storage. Schools and libraries attached to mosques turned open courtyards into classrooms, where scholars taught under shady colonnades in the morning light. Mounted archers were still the symbol of their military might, but it was stone and syllabus, buildings and books, that displayed their long-term ambition. They contested the influence of their rivals, the Fatimids, in Syria and the Holy Lands of the Hijaz, and spent vast resources holding their fractious frontiers together. After strong rulers like Alp Arslan died, rival princes and powerful military households often split the provinces, and assassinations by militant sects added to the strain. Yet, the new word they popularized, sultan, an authority rooted in command and administration, not just royal lineage, took hold and outlived their dynasty. It is into this world, a world where libraries are full and arguments are louder than drums, that our next figure is born. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali comes of age in a landscape crackling with intellectual energy. Jurists are drafting rulings, philosophers are modeling the cosmos, and mystics are speaking of the heart's hidden veils. The great courts sponsored fiery public debates, and in colleges and private salons, students memorized grammar by day and tested the limits of logic by night. In this climate, the questions became sharper. What counts as certain knowledge? Where do pure reason and divine revelation meet? And who gets to decide the limits of each? Al-Ghazali trained as a brilliant jurist and studied logic, theology, and philosophy with a rigor that impressed everyone, patrons and rivals alike. Still a young man, he received the post most scholars could only dream of, a prestigious chair at the great Nizamiya College of Baghdad. The schedule was punishing: constant lectures, intense disputations, and responding to challenges from every intellectual camp. He wrote handbooks for his students, legal opinions for government officials, and fierce polemics against his peers. To the public, he was a brilliant, unshakable mind, completely in command. But in private, a crack was widening, an inner break that would become decisive. One day, while teaching, he lost his voice. A physical silence that spoke of a much deeper spiritual doubt. His reputation, his income, his immense influence, it all began to fall away as he made the shocking decision to leave Baghdad behind. He turned to Sufism, the mystical path of Islam, not as a withdrawal from thought, but as a new method to test the very nature of the self. He sought out austere teachers, practiced intense meditation and remembrance, and watched how his own desires could dress themselves up as reason. Damascus, Jerusalem, and Mecca became markers on his path. Solitude and travel were paired with the notes that would later become his greatest books. From that decade-long journey comes a vast, monumental synthesis of Islamic thought, the revival of the religious sciences. In it, Al-Ghazali attempted to bridge the gap between the legalistic scholars, speculative philosophers, and the introspective mystics, arguing that true knowledge required not just a sharp mind, but a purified heart. His work would go on to profoundly shape Islamic thought for the next 1,000 years, a testament to a journey that began with a crisis of faith and ended with a revival of the soul. 1,000 years ago, one of the most influential thinkers in history, Al-Ghazali, argued just that. He didn't see law as a simple list of rules or ethics as a collection of slogans. For him, the real work was internal. He delved deep into the human soul, examining intention, distraction, pride, and envy. He taught that our daily habits, the small things we do over and over, are what truly reshape our hearts. Al-Ghazali's writings weren't dry academic texts. They read like a clinic for the soul. He blended evidence, sharp analysis, and practical advice, creating a guide for everyday life. But he was no blind follower of tradition. He famously wrote The Incoherence of the Philosophers, a powerful critique of thinkers he felt had overstepped the limits of human reason. He wasn't against logic, far from it. He embraced it where it applied, but rejected speculative leaps about the nature of God or creation that could be proven. His message was about balance. He argued that reason and faith weren't enemies, but partners. Philosophy had its tools, but they were meant to serve faith, not replace it. He insisted that disciplines must know their limits, and that revelation provides answers where proof runs out. This approach restored a profound intellectual respect for mysticism and taught religious law to look beyond the act and ask about the motive. This balanced perspective would travel far, influencing scholars in the West for centuries to come. Al-Ghazali's life followed a steady rhythm. He'd pray alone before dawn, study by candlelight, and then teach. He developed a new language for moral psychology, carefully tracing how a simple thought can morph into an impulse, and that impulse into an action. He was a pioneer, studying the intricate struggle between our reason, our appetites, and our faith with the precision of a doctor. His revival of spiritual learning spread not through grand pronouncements, but through public reading circles, hand-copied manuscripts, and students who carried his ideas back to their own communities, forever changing the intellectual landscape. Around the same time Al-Ghazali was mapping the human soul, another revolution was taking place, one of gears, valves, and flowing water. In the 12th century, knowledge wasn't just for contemplation. It was a toolkit. Engineers and inventors began turning abstract theories from philosophy and mathematics into tangible machines that reshaped daily life. Cities drew water with precisely calibrated devices. Mills powered entire workshops, and craft guilds built incredible instruments for surveying, timekeeping, and irrigation. This shift was practical and profound. You could see it in city records and work contracts. Construction crews were scheduled by the hour. Canals were maintained by rotating teams. Workshops kept standardized parts on hand for quick repairs. This was the Golden Age meeting everyday life, with machines setting the rhythm for markets, prayer, and transport. And one name stands out as the clearest voice of this incredible movement: Al-Jazari. Serving in the Articad court, Al-Jazari created a manual that was part catalog, part lab notebook, and part teaching text. His book of knowledge of ingenious mechanical devices described over 100 machines. Each entry came with detailed diagrams, a list of materials, and step-by-step assembly instructions. He favored a modular approach, using common components like wooden frames, bronze shafts, and leather seals. This meant a device built in one workshop could be perfectly replicated in another, eliminating guesswork. It was a system built for sharing knowledge. Timekeeping was one of Al-Jazari's great passions. He developed incredibly complex clocks that did more than just mark the hours. Using float regulators and siphons, he created a steady flow of water, then masterfully translated that motion through a series of cams and gears to create automated displays. But his genius wasn't just for clocks. He applied the principles of hydraulics to everything. Water lifted by scoop wheels would fill cisterns, which then fed public fountains, garden irrigation systems, and ablution courts for mosques. This wasn't just rule-of-thumb engineering. It was a mature science of hydraulics, complete with scale drawings and repair manuals. Perhaps most famously, Al-Jazari brought mechanics into the public eye with his automata, what we might call early robots. Imagine seeing water-powered peacocks that dispensed water for washing, or a floating boat party with automated musicians striking rhythms on drums. One of his most fascinating creations was a cupbearer figure that would advance and serve a drink, all powered by hidden linkages. He even developed a form of programmable automation using pegs on a rotating cylinder to trigger sequences. By moving the pegs, you could change the routine. This core logic, turning controlled flow into beautiful choreography, would appear in countless other devices. This mechanical mindset was everywhere, even in architecture. The intricate stalactite-like ceilings known as muqarnas required precise templates and a deep understanding of load paths. Doors rotated silently on bronze pivots set in recessed sockets, reducing friction and wear. Workshop treatises from the era show detailed diagrams for cutting gear teeth according to proportional rules, ensuring torque was transferred cleanly. A construction site wasn't just a place of labor. It was a coordinated laboratory, with masons, carpenters, and surveyors all working from a shared, precise plan. And the innovation didn't stop with water power. In dry regions, inventors built windmills with vertical or horizontal sails, their orientation carefully aligned with local wind patterns. There were even attempts at controlled flight, with designs focused on balance and lift, a far cry from simply leaping and hoping for the best. Early boiler experiments used steam to move pistons, demonstrating a keen curiosity about the power of heat, even if they weren't yet economically viable. At night, workshops buzzed with activity, lit by oil lamps, as artisans filed gears, bent pipes, and scribes meticulously copied diagrams for the next generation. One of Al-Jazari's most enduring inventions, the crankshaft, is still with us today, sitting inside nearly every modern engine. It was a reliable way to convert the back-and-forth motion of a piston into the rotary motion that powers our world. One of his magnificent water clocks would change its display every hour, with zodiac panels, falcons, and drummers all shifting on cue. It was a spectacle that entertained audiences while teaching them the principles of mechanics. It turned time itself into a moving lesson. What connected this vibrant world of ideas and machines? Trade. An intricate network of routes acted like a nervous system, linking distant cities and cultures. Caravans moved along established paths, with wells and rest stops marking the way. Camel trains carried textiles, paper, and salt across the Sahara. To the east, the legendary Silk Roads fed into the heartlands of Persia and Central Asia, then down toward the Persian Gulf. Maritime lanes extended this network even further. Dhows with their distinctive triangular sails rode the monsoon winds from Arabia to India and from Persia to the Strait of Malacca. The seasons of trade were set by wind charts that had been refined over generations. Ports on the Red Sea and Persian Gulf were bustling hubs, funneling cargoes inland to the great cities of Baghdad, Cairo, and Damascus. Their wholesalers would break down shipments, sending goods out to regional markets. From fine silks and fragrant spices to brilliant dyes and precious metals, this was a world knitted together by commerce, curiosity, and an unceasing drive to innovate. Imagine a world stitched together by trade routes, a vibrant tapestry woven with silk, spices, and knowledge. From China, bolts of silk, fine porcelain, and gleaming lacquerware journeyed west. From West Africa, gold dust, kola nuts, and ivory flowed north. In bustling Syrian workshops, master artisans crafted glassware and intricate metalwork. Lepo's clothiers exported textiles dyed in a rainbow of colors. This wasn't just a trade of goods, but a trade of ideas. Egyptian papermakers supplied sheets that made copying books faster and cheaper than ever before. Manuscripts, with price notes scribbled on their first pages, traveled in crates, filling the libraries of mosques, madrasas, and private homes. As goods changed hands, customs houses meticulously recorded weights and measures. Using standardized scales that kept disputes to a minimum and business booming, a shared language, Arabic, became the universal tongue of commerce. It was the language of account books, contracts, and maritime manuals. Islamic coins, gold dinars, and silver dirhams circulated with consistent weight and value, meaning a deal struck in Cordoba could be settled in Cairo or Nishaper without a second thought.
Our money changers
Posted daily exchange rates, and trust was built on reliable mint marks and recognizable script. This vast network was built on ingenious systems to manage risk. Merchant guilds negotiated tolls with local governors. Partners wisely spread their cargo across several ships and caravans, rather than betting everything on a single journey. Letters of credit, known as SAC, allowed a trader to deposit funds in Baghdad and withdraw them as far away as China, with brokers confirming identities through seals and coded phrases. A fortune, written on a slip of paper, could travel more safely than a chest full of coins. Seafaring skills shrank the vast distances between continents. Navigators expertly read the monsoon cycles, used improved astrolabes to fix their position by the stars, consulted compasses when the coast disappeared into the haze. Hulls were built with sewn planks or nails, depending on the region, while agile lateen rigs allowed ships to tack against the wind along tricky shores. The crews were as mixed as the ports they visited, a chorus of Arabic, Persian, and Swahili echoing across the decks. Great hubs turned this trade into a flourishing culture. Cordoba's markets overflowed with North African leather, Spanish steel, and exotic aromatics. Its scholars borrowed instruments and texts that arrived with the traders. Cairo, the crucial link between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, was a whirlwind of brokers and packers. Samarkand, where the steppe routes met fertile valleys, buzzed with embassies and caravans sharing news and stories. In its arcades, sellers displayed shimmering silks next to baskets of cinnamon and myrrh. While scribes drafted contracts over cups of tea, this was a world connected by trust, knowledge, and shared ambition. But then at the start of the 13th century, a new power rose from the Eurasian steppe. A leader named Genghis Khan united the warring clans into a disciplined, merit-based fighting force. He built a courier network that could relay orders across mountains and deserts with lightning speed. The result was a machine for war that moved faster than its enemies could even react. Towns that refused to submit faced coordinated assaults from archers, sappers, and siege crews, all drilled to work as one. The news of their devastating victories traveled even faster than their riders, breaking the will of cities before the first arrow was loosed. The Islamic world, with its rich trading cities, stood directly in the path of this storm. The arteries that linked China, Central Asia, and Iran were severed. When a diplomatic dispute turned deadly, the conflict escalated into total annihilation. Otrar, Butra, and Samarkand fell one by one. Their legendary libraries, their brilliant scholars, their centuries of accumulated knowledge all vanished in the smoke. Workshops that had produced the world's finest instruments, paper and glazed tiles, fell silent. The caravans stopped. The great chain that moved goods, money, and ideas across continents was broken. Resistance was fragmented and disorganized. Rival dynasties argued over who should lead. City militias distrusted frontier commanders. Some garrisons fought to the last man. Others, hoping to save lives, opened their gates and surrendered. The Mongols masterfully exploited these divisions. They mapped rivers, tested walls with mining teams, and applied siege techniques gathered from every engineer they conquered. The psychological blow landed first. Terrifying stories of destroyed cities raced ahead of their armies, bending the will of city councils before the battle had even begun. Their warfare was on a scale never seen before. Siege parks were assembled with massive traction trebuchets and counterweight machines. Specialized units laid wooden roads over marshes to move these engines into position. Bombs, using an early form of gunpowder, blasted open gates and set rooftops ablaze, while smokescreens concealed sappers as they undermined the walls. It was a terrifying combination of Chinese, Persian, and Central Asian military knowledge, refined and unleashed with brutal efficiency. The while, the unstoppable steppe cavalry swarmed the countryside, cutting off relief columns and supply lines until every fortress stood utterly alone. After Genghis Khan's death, his heirs divided the vast empire. One of his grandsons, Hulagu Khan, was given a clear mission: bring the remaining powers of Southwest Asia to heel. He advanced through the Iranian plateau, his army swelling with conquered forces, siege crews, and surveyors. Cities surrendered or were taken, their resistance serving only as a grim warning to the next town in his path. His ultimate target was the heart of the old world, Baghdad, still the glorious center of learning, culture, and the symbolic authority of the Caliph. As Hulag's armies closed in on the Tigris River, the contrast was stark. Life continued. Scholars debated in libraries, markets bustled with the sale of paper and spices, and bookbinders went about their craft. But outside, a different world was taking shape. Earthworks rose from the plains, pontoon bridges were floated into place. The monstrous siege engines rolled forward. The very trade routes that had once brought prosperity to Baghdad now delivered its doom, carrying Mongol scouts and artillery crews. There's a quiet irony in the historical record. Mongol commanders were seen consulting astronomers for calendars and navigation, adding Islamic instruments and maps to their own toolkits. Even as the storm gathered, the legacy of the region's scientific achievements was present in the gear strapped to the saddles of its conquerors. The year is 1258. The approaches are measured. The stage is set. The gates of Baghdad, the jewel of the world, come into view. In late January, the siege begins. Earthworks rise beyond the canals, and pontoon bridges lock both banks of the Tigris. The end of an era had arrived. The year is 1258, along the banks of the Tigris River. The colossal army of Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, closes in on Baghdad. This isn't just another raid. This is a siege of unprecedented scale, a systematic, coordinated operation designed to suffocate the greatest city of its time. Siege engines, massive trebuchets, capable of working day and night, are moved into fixed positions. The air, once filled with the sounds of scholarship and commerce, now hums with a new, terrifying pressure. Inside the city walls, the situation grows desperate. Resources are stretched thin. Outside, Mongol scouts sever supply lines, cutting roads and clearing orchards to keep their approach lanes open. The ring tightens, strangling the city until not even a messenger can slip through the lines. Hulagu Khan's army is a marvel of military organization, a force the region hasn't faced in generations. Cavalry units screen the siege lines, protecting the engineers. Heavy crews work tirelessly, building and repairing the mighty trebuchets that will soon rain destruction. Sappers dig tunnels, undermining the city's defensive towers. While a sophisticated command structure keeps every part of this vast war machine informed and coordinated. When you count the Allied troops, the laborers, and the camp followers, estimates place the total number of people involved in the hundreds of thousands. This immense force surrounds Baghdad in layers. Even if the city's defenders managed a successful sortie, they would only break through one line to be met by fresh, waiting ranks of Mongol warriors. The jewel of the Abbasid world, once a beacon of knowledge and culture, has been reduced to a target, its magnificent architecture measured in angles and ranges for the artillery. Within the palace, the Caliph al-Mustazim is paralyzed by indecision. He wavers between negotiation and defense, a fatal hesitation, sends out envoys to plead for terms, only to recall them. He tries to summon garrisons from other regions, but it's far too late. He listens to advisors who tragically underestimate the sheer scale of the danger at his gates. While his chancery drafts letters seeking a peaceful resolution, his quartermasters are taking stock of the dwindling grain supplies. This uncertainty costs precious days. Days matter when behemoth siege engines are rolling ever closer. By the time the decision is finally made to bar the gates and fight in earnest, the Mongols have already secured the bridges over the Tigris. Their heaviest machines are in place, well within killing distance of the battlements. The trap is sprung. The bombardment begins. It is a relentless, concentrated assault. To counterweight trebuchets, the most advanced artillery of their day, hurl massive stones that shatter the parapets and defensive towers. Battering rams pound against the walls, finding weak points and creating breaches. Fires begin to take hold where wooden roofs meet stone walls, spreading chaos and panic among the defenders. Once a significant opening is created, the true discipline of the Mongol army is unleashed. Specialized units pour through the breach, fanning out with chilling efficiency. Their objective is clear: to choke the streets, seize the crossroads, and prevent any organized resistance from forming. What started as a collapse at the edge of the city quickly becomes a torrent of destruction, a relentless rush that sweeps toward its very heart. For 7 horrifying days the city burns, flames leap from district to district, consuming everything in their path. Storehouses, bustling markets, and family homes all become fuel for the inferno. The air is thick with the sounds of battle, the cries of the fleeing, and the deafening crash of falling timbers. The scale of the cultural loss is almost impossible to comprehend. The House of Wisdom, the Grand Library of Baghdad, and arguably the greatest center of learning in the world, is utterly destroyed. Countless other libraries filled with irreplaceable manuscripts go up in flames. Priceless scientific instruments melt in the heat. Catalogs, commentaries, and centuries of accumulated knowledge vanish into the smoke. The human cost is just as staggering. The city's intellectual elite, the jurists, physicians, astronomers, and philosophers, are decimated. Many die where they worked in their libraries and observatories, trying to save the knowledge they had dedicated their lives to. Contemporary reports, though likely exaggerated, paint a grim picture. They say the Tigris River ran black with the ink from countless books dumped into its waters, and then red with the blood of the slaughtered. A city that was home to over 1 million people, a bustling metropolis of culture and innovation, shrinks to a fraction of its size in a matter of weeks. Its famous bridges are broken, its vibrant corridors now unrecognizable piles of rubble and ash. This defeat marks the end of more than just the Abbasid Caliphate. It shatters the entire intellectual ecosystem that had flourished for centuries. The vast networks that carried texts across the known world, that funded scholars and trained physicians, are fractured. Hospitals lose their endowments. Observatories lose their staff. The workshops that produced paper, glass, and intricate brass fittings, the very tools of scholarship, are closed. The blow lands not just on a city, but on the system that had linked research, teaching, and practice, turning a regional capital into a continental center of knowledge. With Baghdad silent, the world of ideas must find new anchors. The shock waves of its fall ripple outwards. In Cairo, Damascus, and Aleppo, rulers urgently review their city walls, their arsenals, and their alliances, wondering if they will be next. In Anatolia and North Africa, courts read the news with a mixture of fear and opportunism, sensing a power vacuum. Trade routes, the lifelines of the medieval world, begin to adjust, with caravans steering towards safer hubs. But not all is lost. Some scholars and craftsmen manage to flee ahead of the storm. They carry with them their precious skills and, in some cases, partial libraries saved from the flames. Their arrival in new cities seeds new intellectual circles. They begin to restore teaching schedules, rebuild toolkits, and restart the vital work of copying and preserving texts. Back in Baghdad, the city's iconic domes have collapsed. A thick haze of smoke dulls the reflection on the river. And then the noise, the centuries of debate, commerce, and life falls away. What remains is ash, broken stone, and a profound quiet that follows a civilization's end. Yet history is a story of cycles. In time, parts of the conquering Mongol elite themselves convert to Islam. They begin to sponsor repairs to the devastated city and even support new schools. It's a small but powerful sign that ideas possess a resilience that stone walls do not. They can travel, adapt, and find new life even after the institutions that housed them have failed. The Golden Age that had gathered so much knowledge in one place closes here, in the rubble of Baghdad. You might think that when Baghdad fell, a golden age of knowledge simply vanished. But that's not what happened. It didn't disappear, it migrated. Imagine scholars and craftsmen like intellectual refugees, carrying their precious cargo methods, instruments, and fragments of libraries to safer courts. They didn't just hoard this knowledge, they kept teaching, ensuring the flame of inquiry wasn't extinguished. This spirit of translation, experimentation, and commentary wasn't just a fleeting moment, it became a self-sustaining habit. Think of it like a powerful current of organized knowledge. In cities like Cairo, Damascus, and across Anatolia, new centers of learning sprang up. Endowments funded hospitals, observatories, and colleges that adopted the same rigorous workflows developed in Baghdad. They standardized instruction, tested results, and meticulously preserved records for the next generation of thinkers. So how did this incredible body of knowledge travel west? It flowed through stable gateways, in Spain, particularly in Toledo. Translation circles became vibrant hubs where Arabic scientific and philosophical texts were meticulously rendered into Latin. Scribes then copied and distributed these works across Europe's burgeoning schools. Sicily was another crucial bridge. Here, administrators fluent in Arabic court culture worked alongside Latin clerics and Greek scholars, creating a unique melting pot of ideas. Even the Crusader states, despite the conflict, acted as conduits. European navigators and physicians quickly recognized the practical value of Islamic instruments and astronomical tables. By the 14th century, the curriculum in European universities had been transformed. Students were learning logic, medicine, and astronomy through the lens of Arabic commentary. In a way, the classical world of Aristotle, Galen, and Ptolemy returned to Europe, but it came back enriched. It reappeared with detailed annotations, alternative interpretations, and entirely new proofs. All thanks to Muslim readers who had preserved, debated, and expanded upon it for centuries. One of the most revolutionary gifts was algebra. It provided a universal language for solving problems that went far beyond the limits of classical geometry. Its algorithmic procedures, step-by-step methods for finding solutions laid the groundwork for modern calculation, counting, and centuries later, the very computer science that powers our world today. The influence was profound and practical. In the field of medicine, hospital manuals from the Islamic world describe detailed case histories, the importance of quarantine during outbreaks, and even a form of drug testing using controlled observation. These practices provided Western medicine with routines that it would later formalize and build upon. The scientific method wasn't born in a vacuum. was nurtured in these early hospitals and laboratories. Then there was the science of light. Optical theory was essentially rebuilt from the ground up. Scholars treated light, reflection, and refraction not as abstract concepts, but as measurable mathematical phenomena. This provided a solid foundation that later physicists like Newton and Huygens would extend with their work on lenses and wave models. The way we understand vision and the universe itself owes a debt to these early pioneers of optics. What kept this intellectual fire burning so steadily? Institutions. The Al-Azhar in Cairo, for example, matured into a university that has been in continuous operation for over 1,000 years. It financed professors and students through endowments that outlived entire dynasties, creating a stable environment for scholarship. Further east, the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal courts weren't just centers of political power. They were patrons of knowledge. They supported colleges, hospitals, and workshops that maintained advanced curricula in law, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Observatories from Samarkand to Istanbul became hubs of cosmic discovery. They compiled vast star catalogs and astronomical tables that corrected the errors of ancient astronomers like Ptolemy. These improved charts were not just for academic curiosity, they were vital for navigation. Standardized instruments like astrolabes, quadrants, and celestial globes circulated widely, always accompanied by the books that taught their use. This practical knowledge was eagerly absorbed by seafarers. As mariners pushed into new oceans, these skills became indispensable. Navigators learned to track monsoon cycles with updated tables, use compasses for precise bearings, and check their latitude by measuring the altitude of the stars with improved instruments. The old Portolan charts, which were simple coastal maps, evolved into sophisticated pilot manuals. When European fleets began their great voyages of exploration into the Atlantic and around Africa, they sailed with charts, instruments, and trigonometric methods that had been refined in Arabic and Persian treatises. Cartographers combined these coastal surveys with astronomical fixes, turning perilous voyages into repeatable, predictable routes that connected global markets on a planetary scale for the first time. But this transfer wasn't just about science and technology. It was about how we think. Philosophical debates traveled with the texts, Ibn Sina's or Avicenna's. Sharp distinctions in metaphysics helped clarify complex discussions about essence and existence in Latin schools. Ibn Rushd's, or Averroes. Commentary on Aristotle sharpened European readings of the ancient philosopher, and raised profound questions about the relationship between reason and revelation, questions that scholastic thinkers would wrestle with for generations. Al-Ghazali's penetrating analysis of certainty, causation, and moral psychology deeply influenced ethics and epistemology across religious lines. The point wasn't about adopting a single rigid doctrine. It was about learning a disciplined way to ask and answer fundamental questions using a shared set of intellectual tools. This created a common ground for inquiry that transcended cultural and religious divides. So, the Islamic Golden Age wasn't just a chapter in a history book. It was one of humanity's brightest sparks. From Baghdad to Cordoba, knowledge became the true power that shaped our modern world. Its legacy isn't confined to museums. It's embedded in our science, our medicine, our mathematics, and even the way we reason. If this incredible journey through time inspired you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. That way you'll never miss more stories from the past that built our future. Thanks for watching.